All right. Welcome to my third podcast. Today I have Max Derrat. Is that how you say the last name?
No, it's okay. Everybody pronounces it that way, anyways. It's actually pronounced Derrat.
Derrat. Okay. So just a quick introduction. What do you do exactly?
Um, well, in the internet sphere, I do videos on YouTube, which people seem to like for whatever reason. They primarily focus on two things. One is on mental health and autism advocacy, and the other one, which I imagine will be the major focus of today's conversation, is my analysis into video games. With that, I tend to figure out what the creators of certain games, what their influences might have been, and try to draw their intentions from those influences to sort of figure out what they might have been trying to express with their particular video games. So, like, for example, if something is sort of mysterious that fans tend to theorize over a lot to this day, like let's say the Dark Souls series, I like to try and provide some clarity in that regard.
Mm-hmm. So what? So I came across your channel first, I think, and then you made a mention of Reinstall Paul, who I did a
Mm.
previous interview with in the last podcast. And I just love the way it is that I love the way it is that you do your content. Your content is really cool, and I can see how you were you inspired by Reinstall Paul, or you kind of came. It was kind of something that you stumbled across later as you were doing your own analysis.
I think no, I didn't know him when I started doing Silent Hill, which is it's our mutual love of Silent Hill that I was able to come in contact with Reinstall Paul. I I think I came across him just by pure accident when I was searching up Silent Hill analysis on YouTube. And I saw that he did this entire lengthy analysis of the first video game, and just to see how much time and effort that he put into it, and also all these new things that he pointed out that nobody else seemed to have noticed, I just told myself, okay, I have a whole bunch of people watching my Silent Hill videos and really enjoying them. If the collective aim is to sort of understand that universe better, I've got to forward people onto his videos, which I did. And thankfully, it seems like a whole lot of people went to watch him. And I'm terribly grateful that I could enhance the Silent Hill fan base's fandom, I suppose, in that way.
Yeah, I think the first video that I saw of yours was the most profound moment in gaming because I'm a Metal Gear nut. Like I just think those games are just so unbelievable. And I know there's another guy that does really good analysis of Metal Gear. I think his name is Futurama Sound Production or something like that.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, he does like really crazy in depth ones about like history and that sort of thing. But I loved your take on just how it fragments society, and then with the Silent Hill stuff, you get more into like the mythology of it. So, like, what specifically drew you towards doing uh, Silent Hill? Like what was it that was standing out to you that made you want to do like these analysis videos of Silent Hill?
Well, are you just asking about Silent Hill or just in general?
Well, I guess in general, but specifically, like I think we have the shared love of Silent Hill and I guess Metal Gear as well. But yeah.
Hmm. Well, the answer to the like what drew me to Silent Hill really isn't that interesting. It's actually more it's more appropriately answered in regards to how I just got into it more generally. Um, so, sorry, just excuse me for one sec.
Sure.
Got a bit of a cough. Okay, so back in 2016, I back then I was just doing YouTube as a hobby, just as a place to express my thoughts about whatever. Uh, had I don't know, like a following of about maybe 1,000 people. That's it. And there was this game that came out, totally brand new game, which I'm sure you're probably familiar with. It's called Inside. It was developed by the same people that did the video game Limbo, Playdead Studios. Highly recommend both games. They're both masterpieces, in my opinion. And when that game came out, very short game, but very enigmatic game. It's told entirely without a single word of dialogue, but it's sort of told in a way that encourages people to interpret it and share their interpretations. Well, I figured, you know what, this might make for some good content. I really, really like the game, and I actually have some thoughts about what might be going on here. And so I just threw together a video over the course of a weekend, I think, and then put it out there. And then I guess the YouTube algorithm picked up on it. And when people did watch the video, they expressed overwhelming praise. And so I just said to myself, wow, I guess maybe this is something that I can do on my channel continually. And so I just thought to myself, what are some games that people are really drawn to for their stories and for their subtext and for their symbolism? And I figured the one game that I always wanted to play more of, because it seemed to have a lot of that, was Silent Hill. So I think it was the next year, I think it was at the end of 2017, I don't know why it took me that long, that I finally decided to do videos on Silent Hill. And there you go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Silent Hill is it's like a game series that I've never played anything like it, and I was so bummed whenever PT got canceled.
Oh,
else, like it's such a bummer.
Don't get me started. I'm gonna get triggered.
Yeah, it's so crazy how much stuff he put just into that one short little game. Like he put so many layers of like subtext into that game, and you're like, dude, Kojima's gonna just like knock it out of the park.
Yeah. There's still a Silent Hill's whole shape in my heart. And now anytime I just, people tend to agree that EA is the worst gaming company on the planet. And I actually think that's the objective answer. But I have a subjective flaming hatred of Konami for what they've done to my two favorite franchises with Metal Gear and Silent Hill, because those two franchises, what they were able to bring to gaming artistically is so important and will continue to be emulated for several decades into the future, that the fact that they're just sitting on the shelves, just rotting away, I don't know, because Konami just wants to stick it to Kojima just because they hate him that much, and hate him so much that they're willing to punish other employees who leave and forbid them from ever getting jobs in the entertainment industry again. You think I'm joking? Just go look it up. It's true. It just it brings me close to an autistic meltdown. Let's just say that. And I'm allowed to say that because I'm on the autism spectrum. Don't freak out.
No worries. So there are people that worked at Konami that are trying to keep people that worked on the Metal Gear franchise from working in the games industry, period?
I think what happened was people who threatened to leave Konami after what they did to Hideo Kojima and the way that they treated him, they said, okay, well, if you're going to leave, then we're going to make sure that anytime you try to apply for a job anywhere else in the gaming industry, if we get a call about you, then we're just going to talk shit about you. Excuse me, are we allowed to swear?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Yeah, well, we're going to make sure that you're never able to work again, because you only work for Konami now, in the past, and in the future, and possibly when you're dead as well.
That is, that's really crazy. And I kind of feel like that almost ties into some of the symbolism that people have discovered in PT. Like, people theorize that part of what the symbolism of PT is that the dead baby is Kojima's, I guess, involvement in Silent Hill, or maybe Metal Gear itself.
Yeah.
Because I know, like, somebody made a video. I can't remember exactly what it was.
I know which video you're talking about. I've seen the same video. Yeah.
Yeah, where it's like the PlayStation colors are the flashlight as you go through the rooms, right? Like the green and the blue and the yellow and red or whatever. And there's just like all this different symbolism of it. And it seems like he was aware of that, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but did Konami not even know that he was making PT as a teaser, and he just put it out there, or were they aware of it? Because, like, pretty quickly after they put it out, they shut it down, right?
That's really hard to say. I imagine, whenever it comes to any of their major properties, I'm sure that the executive is aware of that. But I just imagine that maybe something happened in regards to their personal finances, or maybe they're just following, they were just early adopters of the trend that a lot of gaming studios are adopting right now, which is just to go into the mobile market, make all their games free, and then monetize the hell out of them, because the unfortunate reality of the situation is that it's those games that are getting tons and tons and tons of money compared to single player experiences or traditional multiplayer games. Like I heard, the numbers might be slightly off, but I think I got them right. You know, the game Death Stranding, which was also made by Hideo Kojima, that game came out on the PC about a year ago. And to this day, I think it's only made $28 million. Now you think that sounds like a lot, and I'm sure it's like more money than you and I will ever see in our lifetimes. But when it comes to, like, let's say PUBG Mobile, that game makes $10 million per day just in microtransactions. So it's like, you understand why game companies are doing this. But what also makes me mad is that there are so many people who are so ignorant about how all this stuff works and how they're inadvertently or ignorantly ruining the gaming industry by doing this crap. And it's only going to continue from here. It's a real shame, but thankfully, you know, we still have certain game developers like Insomniac or From Software or Sucker Punch that are still trying to keep that market alive. And hopefully, with, you know, the internet, people can continue to be more educated about this sort of stuff.
Yeah, the I wouldn't say it's necessarily the death of the single player game, but it definitely feels like it when you go and you look at the current games, because there's always going to be, you know, the vast majority of games are always going to be kind of copycat, mediocre, or whatever.
Call of Duty, excuse me.
Yeah, Call of Duty, exactly. And then you have the standout games like the Soulsborne series, or you know, like these very like story oriented games. But it definitely feels like it's gotten less and less. I feel like we went through a period where that's what people were aiming for, and then once they found out that they could just put microtransactions in and they could just monetize the hell out of it, then that's what all games went to.
Yeah.
And it sucks. Like I feel like I've just fallen out of playing games. You know, if it doesn't have a cool story or a cool world to explore, I'm just like, I don't really even care.
Well, thankfully, you know, there are bright things to look forward to. Like next week, well, over the next 3 weeks, we actually got a few games that look to have interesting stories. So next week we have the remake of the first Nier game, which I've never played, but a lot of people say is, you know, would be right up my alley in terms of quote unquote profound games rather, which I'm known for covering. Then after that, there's Returnal on the PS5, which probably a lot of people aren't going to play because, you know, the availability and all that, but it looks great. And then after that, we got Resident Evil 8, which based on the showcase that was done yesterday by Capcom, it looks better and better every time I see it. And, you know, even though they're not like intellectually deep stories, they're still fun, and they're single player games, right? So it's not all lost.
Yeah, to me, I guess it doesn't necessarily need to be some deep intellectual game. It just needs to be like an immersive experience that you only get from playing games. You know, like I'm slowly watching some of the reinstall Paul videos on BioShock, and it's just like it's bringing back memories of playing that game. You know, like I don't know if you have any particular thoughts on that, but I love
on BioShock.
Yeah,
I did a video on the first BioShock. It's fantastic. I played it long after it was released. I think it came out in 2007, and I played it for the first time in 2019. God, that game holds up so well. Like, wow. And just the way that the story is able to be, it's a political story, but unlike everything nowadays where you have to take a side whenever you discuss politics, it does so in such an intellectually stimulating way where you can see where both sides are coming from, but you can also see where both sides can devolve into tyranny and dictatorships and violence. It's absolutely brilliant. And to an extent, you also get that with BioShock Infinite as well, which I've always wanted to do a video on, but I've been trying to find an original angle for it. And God, I really hope that BioShock 4 is in development because the games industry needs more people like Ken Levine making games. He's an absolute genius.
Hmm. Yeah, did he say that he's going to continue to make? I thought he was doing like smaller games now.
I honestly don't know.
Hmm.
And also, you know, if that's the case and he's not involved with BioShock 4 at all, my interest in it would take a serious hit unless, I don't know, some really famous game writer is taking taking over, like Amy Hennig or something.
Hmm. Yeah, it's kind of crazy how we. I mean, there's so many people that work on a game, but if it doesn't have that central director to it, then it
Yeah.
just kills the vibe of it. Like I can't even imagine Metal Gear without Kojima.
Well, I mean, it. I understand,
Hmm.
and I was talking in a video I put out a few days ago about the possibility of a Metal Gear Solid 1 remake. How it would just be absolutely incomprehensible to have a Metal Gear Solid game without him being involved somehow, because it's just that entire series is his singular vision brought to life. I think it can be done because we've seen intimations of what it might look like because we got Metal Gear Rising. And from what I understand, the story for that game was very different from the story they had originally planned. But all the right factors would have to be in place to make something anywhere as good.
Hmm.
You know.
Yeah, I think it would be cool to see a remake of the original. I would really like to see a remake of three though, in the engine for Metal Gear Solid 5.
Oh yeah.
That would be insane.
Well, I mean, they did do the cutscenes for that, but it's limited to pachinko machines in Japan.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Hmm. Yep.
but yeah, I'd be down for it. Like any new Metal Gear, I'm all for. Honestly.
Yeah, the engine and the way the way that Metal Gear Solid 5 plays is just it's perfect. It's like the
Mm.
epitome of what Metal Gear is, you know?
Yeah, it's the best gameplay in the series, Metal Gear Solid 5.
Yeah.
It's so good that I actually beat it 100% twice on Xbox One and on PS4.
Damn.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I'm probably going to do it a third time at some point on the PC once I have time. I just don't have the time right now. I'm actually trying to finish Final Fantasy X for the first time. It's just taking me a little bit at the end here. Yeah.
So yeah, I saw that you put up the Final Fantasy 8 piano cover, which was beautiful, by the way.
Thank you.
And like that is a game that's really close to my childhood, close to my heart for sure. Are you planning on making like a series of Final Fantasy games? I mean, uh, videos? Is that
Well, actually, hold on one sec.
go for it?
Got a nasty cough. Actually, I've never played Final Fantasy VIII. The reason why I learned that song was because, let's say, she'll probably be okay with me saying this. My girlfriend, she and I have been sort of challenging each other to learn more piano because we're both very musically inclined. And she showed me this song and she told me that it was one of her favorite songs, Eyes on Me from Final Fantasy VIII. And I thought it'd be nice if I learned it. And so I posted it. So I've never, up until recently, when I first started playing Final Fantasy X, I've never, ever, ever, ever played a Final Fantasy game. But seeing what I've missed by playing Final Fantasy X, it might be worth my while to finally start playing this series because it's one that people have been recommending I play. Final Fantasy X, 6, 7, and 8 are the ones that I get the most recommendations for. Yeah, so we'll see.
Yeah. I think I've come across a couple of people that have done some analysis of Final Fantasy VIII. I think their channel is Resonant Arc. Have you ever heard of them?
No.
They're a channel worth checking out. They do some like long form discussions, just like breaking down the story and whatnot. And
Hmm.
I mean, I would definitely say that's one of the I would put those games up there. The stories with like Metal Gear and Silent Hill and whatnot. Maybe they're not as deep, but for whatever reason, they stick with you. for long periods of time. You know.
It's very charming. At least what I've played. I'm almost at the very end of Final Fantasy X. Have you ever played it before?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I just got to the part at Xanarkand. I just finished the last Cloister of Trials, and I'm fighting that boss where you had to sort of get behind them before you attack them. I figured, okay, I was actually just playing it right before I met up with you. Tried fighting him once, and it's like, okay, you know what? I'm just going to go power up all my aeons, and then just mess him up later after I'm done talking to you.
Right on. So there's a couple of different things that I wanted to like pick your brain about that
Sure.
I've on your page, and I guess the first one would be the mythology of Silent Hill. So
Mm,
since we both love Silent Hill so much, um, for one thing, I've seen all your videos, but it's been a little while, so I don't remember everything as far as like how they're connected. Um, but do you have like an overarching theory? I would assume the Jacob's Ladder, Tibetan Book of the Dead would probably be close to that as to like how it is that you view the series.
uh, actually, well, I don't know what you mean by view the series. Like, are you talking about what's going on in Silent Hill?
Yeah, and the mythology. Give me 1 second. My door's jamming real quick. 1 second.
Sure, no problem. Tell those kids to get off your lawn.
Yeah. What's going on, Bradley? Douglas, thank you for commenting, by the way. But anyway, yeah. So the what is your? I mean, do you have like a cohesive idea of what the game series is about?
Um, well, it's hard to say that I have an objective version of it, but I try to have a view of it that's approaching objective. It's all just my theories, after all. Basically, what's going on in Silent Hill is there seems to be either some no. How do I explain this? There's a power that rests in Silent Hill that is able to give form to a person's unconscious or subconscious thoughts. Now, they can be thoughts that reside in the personal unconscious of somebody, like we see in Silent Hill 2, where we see the manifestations of James Sunderland's mind come to life. Or it can be the manifestations of a whole bunch of different people's minds all at once. So, like, for example, in Silent Hill 1, we see the manifestations of somebody else's mind other than Harry Mason, who we play as. We see the manifestations of Cheryl's mind or Alessa's mind, depending on how you view it, pop up. We also see in Silent Hill 2, we see the abstract daddy monster, which is a product of Angela's mind. And the reason why I suppose people come to this part of the world is because their unconscious mind shares a link to it, and it's calling out to them in the physical world. Well, both it's calling out to them physically and mentally. So they're drawn there, and they have to go there because there's some sort of unconscious content that needs to be confronted and either defeated or integrated. So in the case of Silent Hill 1, they have to defeat the god of Silent Hill in order to release Alessa from her torment and Cheryl from her connection to what happened to Alessa. In Silent Hill 2, James has to confront the part of himself that made him kill his wife, right? Sorry if you hear noises going on outside. There's people doing lawn work even at this time of night. And so as for why that power exists there, some might call it magic or religious. But other people might call it, what's the word? might call it what is it, quantum or something, because there's the whole theory that I have about the multiple dimensions and how people can come into contact with them. So it all is sort of a matter of how you tend to view the world and whether you're able to accept certain perceptions. It's actually interesting that you asked me about whether or not I have a cohesive view of it. I've never really actually just viewed it in that way. I just sort of put out views on it that seem to align well with what the author's original intentions were, but I never really tried to formulate an overarching grand theory. That might actually be a good idea for a Silent Hill mythology video. Mm-hmm. Thanks for giving me that inspiration. I might have to think about that.
Well, when I'm looking at your playlist right now, I feel like I said, it's been a little while since I watched it, so I don't remember the full details. But your Jacob's Ladder Tibetan Book of the Dead seems like, from what I remember, that would be a pretty close kind of summary of what it's about, because the Tibetan Book of the Dead, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's basically about going to, is it the Bardo, which is basically the space in between life and death, like as you're dying.
Kinda, yeah. But see, the thing is, nobody in Silent Hill is really dying, right? That the Tibetan Book of the Dead is the Eastern Buddhist view of what happens to the soul after it leaves the body. And supposedly it goes through these 3 Bardo states. But in regards to the people of Silent Hill and how the manifestations of their mind come about, I don't see that really being entirely related. There is a tangential relation between Jacob's Ladder and Silent Hill, and that the products of one's mind are coming to life. Because as Jacob is dying in the movie Jacob's Ladder, it's not exactly the real world that he's living in. It's a projection of his mind, and he's sort of coming to terms with that. It's sort of like an alternate dimension. But in regards to Silent Hill, nobody's really going to those particular Bardo dimensions that the Buddhists are speaking of. It's just different dimensions. This is so nerdy.
I love this stuff. So, okay, my interpretation from what I remember, maybe I'm connecting the dots from a couple of different videos, but yeah, some of them are not necessarily, they're not dying, but there's definitely allusions to the main characters being dead. Like in the first Silent Hill, and one of the endings, he's just dead laying in the car. In the second game, we pass through the apartment complex and he's dead sitting in front of the TV. And then there's also the ending where you I think you drive off the cliff or something like that.
Yeah, the in water ending.
Yeah. So how do you feel like those work into your interpretation?
What, the multiple endings?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. What is your take on that? You don't think that that's a direct reference to maybe the idea of the original Silent Hill almost being like a fever dream as he's dying? Like it can. I guess what they're going for is it can be interpreted in multiple ways, right?
Well, yes and no, because Silent Hill 3 sort of proves the canonicity, of the first game, which is that everything actually happened and they weren't actually dying, right? Like Harry Mason went on to live and raise Cheryl as Heather prior to the events of Silent Hill 3. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, I know what you're saying. Like, in regards to Jacob's Ladder and Silent Hill, you got situations where the products of one's mind are coming to life and the characters are confronting them. And it happens to be in different dimensions. I think the key difference, though, is that in Jacob's Ladder, Jacob is in the process of dying throughout the entire movie, whereas in the main Silent Hill series, nobody actually is dying. They just happen to be cycling sort of through dimensions. And that's a more inside ball sort of stuff, or what is it? Inside baseball sort of stuff, where you got the synchronicity theory, which everybody loves hearing me talk about on my channel, and it's really, really complicated. But just the easiest way to understand it is that they are cycling through dimensions, and those dimensions are connected to them through their mind.
Okay. Okay. So then you got to get into your synchronicity theory.
Okay. Okay. Well, do you want me to go into full detail about that?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, I'll do my best to simplify something that's really, really complicated. So the synchronicity theory, it isn't my theory. It obviously comes from somebody that I talk about on my channel a lot, the Swiss psychoanalyst. His name is Carl Jung. And Jung, he came up with this theory called synchronicity because he had this theory for a long time that the mind has sort of a material element to it, and that the material world has an element of the mind to it. And we see echoes of this in like Buddhist philosophy, like just bringing up Jacob's Ladder. I talk about a concept in that video, a Buddhist concept called the universal mind. And I think the universal mind is made up of those three Bardo states, which is the Dharmakaya, the Sambhogakaya, and the Nirmanakaya. I don't remember exactly everything I said in that video, but I'll try to simplify it. So yeah, the universal mind is basically the material world as we see it, but it's also mind, right? So Jung plays with that metaphysical assumption that there's this sort of interlinking between mind and matter in the same way that there's an interlinking between light and darkness, male and female, just like you can't have one without the other, right? Okay. And so Jung tried to make sense of what that connection might be. And he looked at possible scenarios in his own life and in the lives of his patients that he had as a psychologist. And one thing that he happened to see happen a lot is that there would be things that occur in people's dreams that seem to happen in real life. So, for example, the one that I often cite a lot on my channel, to give a good example of what synchronicity is that Jung once had a patient who was very atheistic and didn't believe in God or spirituality or anything like that, but she dealt with a lot of psychological problems. And when she was with Jung during their sessions, he would do a lot of dream analysis with her. And one recurring dream that she had a lot was that she had somebody hand her a piece of golden jewelry, and that golden jewelry was in the shape of a scarab, so a golden scarab, right? And right after she told him this dream, there was a tapping at Jung's cabinet door, tapping on the glass. And he went over to see what the tapping was, and it was a bug. And then he caught it in his hands, walked over to his patient, and he said, "Well, here's your scarab." And it was a golden scarab. And that was particularly freaky because when I believe he was practicing in either Austria or Switzerland at the time, obviously golden scarabs are a very, very rare insect to see in that type of climate. You know, normally you see them in the Middle East and in Africa and stuff like that. So that would be an example of the mind sort of merging with the material world. Now, I sort of took that synchronicity theory. When I first learned about it, I learned about it listening to a podcast called Speaking of Jung, which is hosted by, what's her name? I forgot what her name was. I'm so sorry. I'll look it up as soon as I get an opportunity when you're talking. Laura London, that's what her name is. Laura London hosts Speaking of Jung, and she was talking to a guy named Gary Sparks, and they were talking about how there was this theory called synchronicity and how it sort of posits that there's a link between the mind and the material world, and everything that I just said. And then there was this intuition that I had where I thought, that's a lot like Silent Hill. So I took that theory and I pondered over it for a long time, trying to make sense of how those two things could fit, because I felt like they fit, but I couldn't really figure out how. So I stuck with it for a couple of weeks, and then I just put out a video on my channel called Silent Hill Mythology, the Multiple Dimension Theory. And that was the best that I was able to make sense of it at the time. But then after that, I started realizing that, wow, I wasn't the only one that was able to pick up on this link between the mind and matter. And it's actually been repeated a lot, not in just movies, but in video games. So the prime example I would cite other than Silent Hill is a game called Control, which was made by the same guys that did Max Payne, Quantum Break, and Alan Wake. In that game, they actually reference synchronicity and how it's a connection between the mind and the material world. And in that game, you actually do go to different forms of reality, all of which are based on the products of one's dreams. And so it's this really, really popular concept among writers, it seems, because I see it popping up everywhere. And I've really been drawn to it because just the fact that it's such a powerful thing, you know, being able to confront the aspects of one's mind in the physical world, being able to see it in fiction is terrifying enough as it is. I think it's part of the reason why people revere Silent Hill so much as the greatest horror game of all time so long after it came out. That to think that there might be some sort of validity to the concept of synchronicity, that's the only thing that I think can be more terrifying. Did I make any sense of that? I know it's a lot to take in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that goes into my own uh, studies that I've kind of done in my own ideas of spirituality and that sort of thing over the last year. That I've kind of I've had moments of synchronicity. I've had moments of synchronicity a lot lately, but it's interesting that when you when you change your thinking, your world changes. And
Mm,
growing up, I never really understood why the world seemed to react to me the way that it did until I started to really kind of rediscover the idea of faith in a lot of ways. Like I don't really know how else to say it. Um, like I had a very strong Baptist upbringing that turned me off of religion for a long time and went super hardcore atheist. And then over the last, I don't know, 5, 6 years or whatever, I've kind of rediscovered my spirituality through like Buddhism and that sort of thing. And and I've noticed that that whenever you turn your attention towards something, uh, it somehow manifests in your life in a way that you never really could have expected. You know, it's kind of one of those things. It's like be careful what it is that you wish for because you might get it. But I've noticed that I've noticed that specifically with because I remember you talking about a specific synchronicity that happened in your life, and I don't know if you want to talk about it, but
yeah.
I've had a couple of my own recently. Like a few months ago, I was in a situation where I was getting into this guy on YouTube. His name is Joseph Rodriguez, and I talked about him with Reinstall Paul. He has a great YouTube channel where he goes really in depth into a lot of the same things that we're talking about. And what he talks a lot about is about affirmation and basically writing something as if you already have it, in a sense. So that is faith. The way that he explains it is a little bit different, but I've discovered that that is what it is. Uh, but I had a situation where I was like, I want to make like 5 grand a month. That's what it is that I want to make because I was in a situation where I wasn't doing very well financially. And out of the blue, man, I get a text message from this clinical medical studies that I had signed up for like, I don't even know, like 6 years ago, something like that, or more than that. I didn't even, the place is called Covance Medical Studies. I hadn't even thought about them in like 10 years. I had seen them in an article in Wired about people being like lab rats for money, and I think maybe I signed up for something with them. But all of a sudden, I get a text message, and it's like 6 grand medical study in 3 weeks, and I went and did it, and I just finished another one today. Just finished my second medical study, and that money alone has like completely changed my life.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, but go ahead. What was the synchronicity that you had talked about in your video?
Well, I think I talked about three of them. I'm just trying to remember what they were. Uh, huh. There were well, the one that sort of stuck out to me the most in my life, uh, just because it was my first experience of synchronicity, or what you could possibly call synchronicity, and it's also the only one that I can remember from that video, at least all the details of. So I went to France back in 2010, back when I was still in high school, for my grade 12 French credit. And when I was there, we were there for a full month, but we were in Paris for, I think, about 9 days. Uh, one of the days that we were there, we went up to one of the main locations in Paris, which is this huge white chapel called Sacré Coeur. Obviously, that translates to a Sacred Heart. It's in an area of Paris called the Ninth Arrondissement. That's where a lot of, it's mainly Paris's cultural center. You can find the Moulin Rouge there, for example. That's where they film a lot of their films. We went up to the chapel to have a French lesson, and then after we were done, we had a couple hours to roam around the area around that chapel. But we got back to where we were supposed to meet up about an hour early. And we were trying to figure out, hey, what are we going to do? Are we just going to keep wandering around? And then one of us just suggested, hey, the sun's about to go down completely. Why don't we just sit and watch the sunset? And I thought, yeah, that's fine. It's relaxing. We got a whole lot done in the past hour. So we hopped over the fence. And then what happened was, as we were scaling down this really, really steep grass hill, and it was like everybody else lies on the grass there all the time. It's totally legal. Don't worry. We weren't trespassing on the grass. My foot went into some sort of like rabbit hole, and I tumbled forward, and my right knee hit this rock, and then I somersaulted forward and landed on my back. And it was some of the worst pain that I'd ever experienced in my life. And it was particularly scary because, I was like 6,000 miles away from home. And I didn't like the idea of having to go to the hospital for a broken knee. But the problem is we had to wait about an hour until our group came back. We didn't really know what to do. We didn't have cell phones. And they were asking me, hey, do you think you could wait until they came back? And I said, yeah, even though the pain was quite bad. So to sort of distract myself from the pain for the next hour, what I did was something kind of obnoxious. I had recently become a friend of mine, a couple friends of mine named Hillary and Diana. They turned me on to Audrey Hepburn and her movies from way back in the day, because I was just starting to get into really, really old film. And so I recently saw Breakfast at Tiffany's, and the theme song from that movie is Moon River, which is obviously the most covered song of all time. And I just started singing it at the top of my lungs because I figured that would be a way to deal with my pain. And I think I sang it 5 times in a row. And then after having done that, for whatever reason, the pain in my leg just seemed to dissipate. Like it seemed to completely go away. And thankfully, unfortunately, the synchronicity part of the story is all the way at the end, and I have to explain all this in order for it to make sense. So an hour later, my group members come by, my leaders come by. My knee feels fine. And so we start walking down the steep hill back into the main hub of the city, back where our hotel was. But because we were going down a steep hill, that was putting more strain on my right leg, and the pain came back. So I had my buddy Sohail, who I'd met on the trip. He was helping me along by me putting my shoulder around his, which was kind of awkward because he's like a foot shorter than I. And I'm 6'4". I was like the tallest person there, but he was kind enough to help me out. So we're going down the hill, and naturally it was taking a lot longer for us to get there because everybody else wants to take pictures of stuff as we're going by. So I turn a corner, and a whole bunch of my classmates are standing in front of me, and they're taking pictures of a wall. And I didn't exactly see what they were taking pictures of because my mind and my head was just turned towards the ground. And I was just like, oh, God, guys, can we just get back to the hotel so I can put some ice on this thing? And then I turned my head to look up at the wall, and it was a painting of Audrey Hepburn.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was just freaked out because that song, if anybody knows anything about that song, it's heavily associated with Audrey Hepburn. So I don't know why that happened, but I can tell you that when I saw her, it gave me this feeling that, I don't know, you can't possibly describe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like you all of a sudden feel just intimately connected with the world around you.
Like the cosmos are aligning or something.
Yeah, and what I think is so interesting about this is that I think the guy that does the Metal Gear videos, he has a great video about Metal Gear and language, Metal Gear Solid 5, and its ideas about language, about English being a parasite, which I'm curious to hear your thoughts about it. His basic idea is that the English language, with its very scientific, very like everything is very compartmentalized, everything is very much like categorically in the place that it needs to be. It's the language of science. It's the language of the atom, breaking everything down into these reductionistic ideas. It's colonizing and destroying the other languages around the world and taking away these ideas in language that once those concepts are destroyed, the thought itself is gone. And I feel like our society tries to tell us that something along those lines is just a coincidence. It has no meaning. It doesn't mean anything. But it's our language that we're filtering that through. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So you want my thoughts on what, like, this guy Joseph's perspective on English is?
Well, that's not Joseph, but it's the Futurum Productions. Let me see if I can find his actual. I'll send it to you. But it was
Sure.
basically about like it was 1984 and Metal Gear. He was basically talking about the connections between Metal Gear and 1984 and like the idea of language. I mean, I was just kind of going off of the thought of like that. I think that our spirituality is disconnected in our society because of our reductionistic approach to language.
I can speak to it. I can't speak to it as effectively as I want to because I'm sort of answering on the spur of the moment, but I can offer a couple thoughts. First of all, the language of science isn't English, it's Latin, number one. No. But yeah, I'm just joking, but it technically is. But yeah, in regards to reducing the world and sort of pushing out other ideas, it's hard to say because on the one hand, yes, by keeping out other ideas, it doesn't allow room for the ideas that are embraced currently to evolve. Because after a while, the truths and the facts that and the methods of living that are embraced now, they can become outdated as time goes on. And by compartmentalizing and pushing everything around just one center, I guess in this case it'd be English, it leaves out other things that might help enhance the way that we collectively live. So for all using English as a way of us understanding the world, there might be things about other cultures and other languages and the other ways other people communicate that might enhance the way that we can live as a species. But having said that, there's also the fact of the matter that a lot of people might be trying to attack things about English and the things that English societies have created that rose to the top based on their competence,
Hmm.
right? So, for example, there's a move in Western universities to sort of decolonize the curriculum and sort of mix in uh, works from people that aren't necessarily Western or come from a Caucasian background or whatever. And I can understand that, but the thing is, you got to be careful about what you're going to replace those things with. So, for example, like what are some famous American writers? Well, I guess you could just go with the two main ones: F. Scott Fitzgerald and Ernest Hemingway. Um, if you're going to replace them, who are you going to replace them with? I mean, those two, their works rose to the top because they were the best of the best. If you're going to replace them, you got to make sure that they are profound in an equal or greater way. Or if they're lesser, they can only be lesser in like a slight way. Otherwise, you totally annihilate the notion of competence and merit. So, in regards to the idea of English being like having those deficits, I think it absolutely does. But there's also the problem of what you're going to replace it with. And in a lot of cases, I see people replacing what, like the good things that like English and English societies have given us with things that are definitely inferior. There are things that have been replaced that are good. There are certain things that are, there are certain benefits to cultures interacting with each other, especially now in the internet age.
Hmm.
But there's also deficits. And so it's this constant push and pull between what is beneficial and what's not. And a lot of people don't necessarily like that because they want things to be simple. In a lot of cases, a lot of people want things to be compartmentalized because they don't want to have to do that much cognitive thinking. But it has to be done. Otherwise, you risk going to extremes and then just having everything fall into oblivion. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I think that it's you're touching on kind of what I'm getting at. Maybe I'm not fully explaining it because I'm just kind of rambling a little bit. But I guess my point was that it was going to kind of tie back into kind of the philosophical ideas of Metal Gear and its connection with 1984. Did you read 1984? What did you think about 1984?
Oh, it's bloody terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So was there something that stands out in your mind as far as like uh, the like its ideas about language, or the idea of like, he who controls the past controls the future, he who controls the present controls the past. Like
Hmm.
like that's I'm actually scrolling through I'm trying to find an exact quote that can kind of sum up some stuff, because he's basically comparing Metal Gear Solid 5 story to 1984, and he's drawing the connections between the two. See if I can find an exact. Um, it's an I know what you're talking about. You're talking about kind of like, I feel like you're kind of starting to touch on maybe even cancel culture a little bit. I
Mm.
know what you're getting at, and I totally I see where you're going with that. Um, and it's a good point. And like you said, there's pluses and minuses to it, because our culture has given so much to the world in terms of science and in terms of like medicine, and just the ability for us to communicate, that it's indispensable to us. Um, and I can't remember what it is that we'd gotten off on.
1984.
Yeah,
And
19.
just, yeah.
Um,
And you were just asking me about my thoughts on the book and uh, language.
mhm.
Like, I'm just trying to think of, like, there's a whole thing about newspeak. I'm just trying to think of examples from the book of how they did that, so I can offer a more articulated answer.
Yeah, so I guess here would be a example of it, because he's got a piece highlighted from the book. It says a wave of understanding rippled through the crowd. Oceania was at war with East Asia. The next moment there was a tremendous commotion. The banners and posters with which the square was decorated were all wrong. Quite half of them had the wrong faces on them. It was a sabotage. That's
Hmm.
on it, right? A little bit.
Well, language, if we all adhere to one mode of living and we accept reality as it's given to us, uh, you understand reality by the way that it's communicated to you through language. And if language is homogenized into one thing, in this case in 1984, it's newspeak. I think that's what it's called.
Yeah.
It's easier to control vast populations of people, which you see in 1984. And to have that concentrated in one political party that dominates everything, it's terrifying. It removes people's individuality, and you see how easy that is for that to happen, especially with we're talking about Metal Gear, and the problems of half truths and misinformation and trying to figure out what's true. I'm sure that people would be more than willing to have somebody weed through that for them. But the problem is no human being has or even any political party has the capacity to do that. But some people might be willing to turn their or give over their rights and all that to a political party just so they don't have to deal with that particular problem. But the problem is that they're ignoring the inevitable outcome of something like that, which is what we see in 1984. I was just wondering, is it okay if I just use the washroom very quickly?
Yeah, go for it. Go for
All right, thanks.
All right, I guess I'm going to go through here and read this chat. I appreciate the hell out of you guys for hanging out, by the way. Taoism was a gateway to my newfound spirituality. The philosophy of yin and yang blew my mind and made me more open-minded. Oh, Brad, you're fine. Let me just read through these. Mariana, you had a dream, and the next day there was a girl that died in your high school. Years ago, my grandmother passed away after her funeral. My great-grandmother. And then he got a call, and the caller ID said St. Peter, but no one was on it. Oh, wow, that is crazy. St. Peter meets souls at the gate of heaven. Really weird. I can explain it away, but it's still strange. Always struck with me. Yeah, I feel like 14 talking about the concept of yeah, 1984 is definitely worth another read, and those experiences. I guess I think me and him got off onto 1984, but I guess my original point was that like these spiritual notions that we all seem to experience. We all seem to have these things that look like they're coincidences to other people that are outside of us, but to us, from our subjective point of view, they're incredibly meaningful experiences. I feel like maybe the English, the scientific language, can sometimes fall short of people communicating those ideas.
Hey, I apologize for that. I have a hard time stringing sentences together when I need to use the washroom.
Okay, you're good, man. Like I might have to get up and go to the restroom here in a second. Anyway, are you
Okay.
are you good with continuing the? Because I don't know how much time it is that you want to spend here.
I could go for like another half hour at max.
So I think that I just broke down to them how it is that I got off on a tangent about the Metal Gear thing. I think my original point with bringing up the English language wasn't so much about um, getting into the cancel culture or anything along those lines. It was more like I think that these concept of synchronicity in a lot of ways. I don't know if our scientifically grounded practical language always speaks to the spiritual side of our lives, because like our language, it is it's based around the scientific, the reductionistic, and I think you can see that even with like the new atheist movement that came up 10 years ago or so, where even the idea of synchronicity is just, it's kind of pushed aside as something that is just a, it's just a coincidence. It's bound to happen in an infinite universe. You know what I mean?
Well,
Which they may
that
have,
hmm?
which they may have a point. Go ahead.
Right, but that's the thing. It's not something that you can really prove because it's something that's completely subjective and subjective to the people that experience it. It's not something that you can quantify using scientific terms. But I understand wanting to use objective scientific terms to try and understand the world. It's because it's so effective.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's not something that can really make any sense out of a theory like synchronicity because it can't be proved. I think that it might be useful for people that have that worldview to be open to new ways of looking at the world. That doesn't mean that they have to relinquish the tools that we know work, like science. But it is worth accepting the possibility that there are things that transcend our consciousness. You know, if scientists say, you know, everything stretches out to infinity and these things that seem like very unlikely coincidences, they are just that, coincidences.
Mhm.
There's also the possibility that there might be an infinite number of reasons that they're wrong. So it's just like some people like to say that in my comment sections whenever I do a video on Jung that I'm religious, or when I do a video on like when I've done my videos on the game Soma or the Taoist principle, they'll call me an atheist. I'm not either. I'm just trying to look at the best arguments from both sides and try to find what side has the greatest argument in favor of either. And that's why I like Jung so much. It's because he took the criticisms of religion seriously from the atheists and from people like Nietzsche, who's sort of a lot of atheists tend to look up to. But he also saw the utility in religion, mainly that it gives a transcendent purpose to the suffering that we experience in this world. Because if there isn't a transcendent purpose to the way that we live on the planet, then there's the possibility that some people might be overcome with so much suffering that it will corrupt them and either drive them to murderousness or suicide. And it's a powerful argument on either side, and it's a dilemma that we're perpetually stuck with. And so because it's such a huge existential problem, it's something that I'm fascinated with, and I want to present both sides honestly, so that, and this sort of dovetails into the other thing that I do on my channel, which is mental health and autism advocacy. I want to be there for other people that sort of deal with these very painful questions and sort of help them along on their journey. And so far, it seems like there's an audience for it.
So how do you think that the philosophical ideas that we subscribe to connect to our mental health? Because it seems like that's pretty much what Jordan Peterson is talking about, from what I gather. I feel like, you know, from a personal standpoint, I've seen that proven true. But I'm curious what your take is on that, because I know you do like the outreach, that sort of thing.
How philosophy connects to mental health? Well, philosophy is all about just how to live a life that is both ethical and preserves one's existence, right? And the reason why there is philosophy is so that we can take these ideas, make them conflict and debate them and see which ones stand out on top. And Peterson talks about a lot of philosophers is because he links them and those philosophies to people that he's seen in his own life and his patients, or people that he's read about, and he's seen how those philosophies, when acted out, work. And I tend to see the logic in his reasoning, because when he talks about, like, let's say the aforementioned Nietzsche, if you're to apply his philosophy, his ideas are very, very powerful and very cunning and very cutting, even. And when taken to their full extremes, we've seen how his ideas can be misinterpreted and even motivate a political movement. So, for example, one thing that I talk about in regards to Nietzsche a lot on my channel is the philosophy surrounding his criticism of Christianity and religion. You know, the one quote that's often attributed to Nietzsche is that God is dead and we have killed him, right? Atheists tend to take that as a triumphant statement, but in fact, it's the exact opposite. Nietzsche actually thought, even though Nietzsche was a fierce critic of religion and especially Christianity, he thought that all hell was going to break loose. Because he figured, well, if all of Western civilization had been predicated on the belief that there is a God and that there is a transcendent purpose for us to work to, there is a transcendent reason to all of our suffering. Once you take that out of the equation and there isn't any more transcendent purpose, well, what are you left with? Well, you're left with a worship of nothing, which would be nihilism, or you're left with a worship of something that humans can create that can sort of substitute God. And in the 20th century, we saw that in the form of totalitarian governments. That's why if you read I think the book is called The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, you read passages about how the Nazis and Hitler idealized and worshipped Nietzsche in a way, and they actually ended up quoting him a lot. It's because they figured that creating one's own values, which is what Nietzsche proposed, is the only way that one is going to be able to survive in the world. But unfortunately, the Nazis took that to the extreme and they figured, okay, well, the only way that we're going to be able to survive is if we get rid of all these other people that we believe are ruining everything. And that's obviously wrong. So it demonstrates how human beings can be, it's a definite argument against the thought and the philosophy that human beings can create their own values, because when we tried to do that, especially in the 20th century, we failed. So suddenly religion seems to have its utility, even though religion has no short of its problems, right? Mm-hmm. So you got to figure out, okay, well, how, even though like Nietzsche obviously was very smart and when applied correctly, he had some wonderful criticisms and wonderful thoughts on the nature of being, there are times where it's possible that he might have been wrong. And you sort of have to constantly have this inner discussion with yourself about what other people might have said and where other people might have been right and where other people might have been wrong. And you have to have that discussion because that's the only way that you can really live a moral life and not let your dark side take over or let the dark side of life completely engulf the planet. And it's hard to do that because having that constant dialogue within yourself all the time is stressful. It's anxiety provoking. I know, I live it. My mind is going a million miles a second, but you got to do it. Otherwise, you might be susceptible to a philosophy that can possess you and turn you into something demonic. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely.
It did? Okay.
So going off of that, that also goes into, Carl Jung also kind of had this idea that he had kind of the idea that ideas have people, have ideas. Is that right?
Yeah, ideas have people. People don't have ideas.
So to him, he saw the world as like, we're kind of almost like cannon fodder for these ideas that are these ideologies, these kingdoms that we have that we want to create in the real world, and people are almost fighting for these imaginary utopias or something.
It almost makes you think that the Greeks were onto something when they made gods of love and gods of anger. It's because they were possessed by these things, right?
Right.
There was no escaping them. You know, it's like the example that I use. It's like when you feel angry, did you decide to feel angry, or did the concept of anger come to you? right? It makes you consider how much of yourself is within your control and how much of yourself is purely deterministic, like how much of yourself is outside of your control.
Mhm.
Right? That's where the whole famous free will versus determinism debate comes in. Um, but yeah, it's a terrifying reality, I would say, that people are in some ways prone to their biology, and maybe by proper socialization, and in the case of Jung, individuation, we can sort of transcend our biological heritage. Now, as for what like archetypes are and instincts and memes and what those things are and why they guide us, you'd have to talk to somebody much smarter than me to be able to get anywhere close to answering that question, because I don't think anybody's come close to answering it. Like most scientists, no, not even most scientists, all scientists, nobody can tell us what consciousness is or how consciousness is produced and how that might be related to archetypes and instincts and all that. Maybe one day we'll figure it out, but I guess what we're just left to do right now is just take archetypes and memes and make stories out of them and mythologize them like we've done for the entirety of human history.
And it seems like whenever as we're doing that, we're kind of like we're teasing out how things work in the real world, and some like kind of mythological. Like I've heard people refer to art as like it's the dreams of the culture. You know,
Mm,
they're like these there's like these collective dreams, and we seem to gather around certain ones, and sometimes we don't even know why it is. Like that's why I love your videos on Silent Hill and Metal Gear and all these different videos, is because even when you're like when I remember playing the first Silent Hill 1 and 2, and I remember playing them as a kid, and I mean obviously being completely freaked out, but I knew that there was something else that was going on here. For some reason it was clicking with me in a way that some cheesy B horror movie that I watched at 2 o'clock in the morning didn't. It's almost like these ideas are these ideas of antiquity are kind of like a part of us,
yeah.
some
The,
level.
well, the reason why Silent Hill is so great is because it's actually giving form to those things that make great stories.
Mm-hmm.
So when like my theory regarding Pyramid Head, right? The reason why people seem to view him as one of the greatest villains, not just in games, but in fiction, is because he is an accurate representation of the dark side of humanity. It's like if you were to try and take the human shadow, whether or the Jungian shadow or the Freudian id, and to try and give form to it. I don't know what it is about a guy half naked with an apron on, dragging a knife and having a pyramid on his head that sort of triggers that thing within all of us, that horror. But it's that, and it's the fact that Silent Hill was able to give form to that archetypal force that resides in all of us that makes it so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what makes all great fiction very powerful. Like I was listening to a conversation that Jordan Peterson had recently. I can't remember who it was with, but he referenced the film Apocalypse Now, which I've also talked about on my channel. And he said that film was a very archetypal film, and I understand why. It's because it's about a confrontation with the darkest parts of humankind and what humankind is capable of, and it does it in the best possible way.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, I feel like we're probably getting close to the end of it. I know you said a little while ago that you didn't want to spend too much time on there. Was there anything you want to plug? You got some more videos coming up?
Yeah, I actually, it's interesting that we're talking about Peterson right now. I'm thinking about releasing a video at the beginning of next week, actually addressing something that a lot of people have criticized him for. It's something that you see a lot in articles that are written about him as hit pieces, and it drives me nuts because it's so. It just reveals immediately to me that the person writing about him has no idea what he's talking about. So one thing that he's been taken to task for a lot is saying that in the yin yang duality of chaos and order, that order is symbolically masculine and chaos is symbolically feminine. Now, to people who are ideologically possessed, or in the best cases, ignorant, they'll say that what he's trying to say with that statement is that femininity, and by extension, the females, women, are defined by something negative, which is chaos, that chaos equals women. And that's just absolutely wrong. I mean, if that was what he was saying, I wouldn't give him the time of day, because I have absolutely no tolerance or patience for legitimate sexism.
Right.
I mean, after all, I do advocacy for people based off of, who are judged based off of factors out of their control. Mm-hmm. I mean, and that, me wanting to advocate for them, it makes me have sympathy for people that are judged for other immutable characteristics like one's sex or gender. In this case, though, Jordan Peterson isn't actually saying that chaos equals women or females. What he's saying is that there's a view of chaos and order and representing them as masculine and feminine that goes way back into our primordial ancestry, way back when the only way that we were able to make sense of the world is through these dualisms, like light and dark, day and night, male and female. And so there's this long tradition of, assigning different like masculine characteristics and feminine characteristics to the world. There's a reason why Earth is referred to as Mother Earth, right? And there's a reason why chaos is symbolically feminine. And I hope to get into that and explain why it's not a bad or good thing. It's an outgrowth of humanity's collective imagination, and it has nothing to do with prejudice. And I'm hoping to release that early next week.
Right on. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And just real quick, Reinstall Paul was actually talking about that too. And I don't know if you ever saw his Magi series.
I don't think I saw the Magi series, but I've seen pretty much everything else.
Yeah, I think he had one where he was talking about how that's represented in art, and how in Hindu religion, the masculine was always represented as, I can't remember exactly the god, but it was always represented as like the universe as a whole, as being like this giant void, and then the feminine was represented as the creation that filled that void. And so it was often represented as like the masculine being the mountains, whereas the feminine was the water that ran through the mountains.
Yeah, there's a tendency to assign these different gender characteristics to existence. So that's a great example. Although I think you got the gender switched around, either you or Paul. Generally, the chaos that existed at the beginning of time is viewed to be feminine, because I'm sort of already explaining what I'm going to talk about in the video, but it's okay. The reason why is because it is the womb from which all of creation springs. Women have wombs. And then if you take a Christian view of this, the force that gave the universe form is God speaking into the void, let there be light, and then let there be day and night, let there be earth, water, and stars in the sky, and animals and plants. And the reason why that's masculine is because God is, at least in the Christian view, is referred to as God the Father. So it's God the Father acting upon the feminine chaos. So it's the masculine energy and the feminine energy working together to create something new. Right?
Okay. Yeah. All right, man. I look forward to that for sure. Thanks to everyone who showed up, and thank you, Max. I appreciate you for even doing this, because I know we don't even know each other, and yeah.
Hey, man, I'll talk to anybody that wants to talk to me. I just hope that, when I talk, that it's coherent. And then if I do make sense, that I don't actually, fatigue people with all this information.
No, not at all. I love this stuff, man.
Okay, cool. Thank God.
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, then I guess we'll chat for a second longer. I'm going to go ahead and end the live stream, but thank you for everybody who showed up and everybody that tuned in.
Yeah. Peace out, guys.
Yep. Peace.